Here's something nobody talks about, but everyone feels. You scroll through social media and you see other people living these incredible lives. And there's this twinge, this uncomfortable feeling you don't want to admit. Envy. Not the toxic kind where you wish others would fail, but that deeper recognition that someone else has something you desperately want. Maybe it's their confidence, their freedom, the way they seem to live unapologetically. The way their life looks like art, while yours feels like a rough draft you keep meaning to revise. Friedrich Nietzsche understood something about envy that most philosophers completely miss. Envy isn't just a negative emotion to overcome. It's actually information. It's your soul telling you what you're capable of becoming. And here's the twist that changes everything. Nietzsche wasn't interested in helping you cope with being mediocre. He wanted to show you how to become the person that others envy. Not through superficial success or social media fakery, but through creating a life so authentic, so powerful, so fully realized that people can't help but look at you and think, I want what they have. Now, before you think this is going to be another hustle culture sermon about becoming the best version of yourself through morning routines and productivity hacks, let me stop you. Nietzsche's philosophy is far stranger and far more radical than that. Because the life worth envying isn't the one that looks good from the outside. It's the one that feels magnificent from the inside. And those two things are rarely the same. Most people build their lives like they're constructing a monument for others to admire. They choose careers that sound impressive at dinner parties. They pursue achievements that look good on paper. They optimize their image while their soul slowly starves. And yes, other people might envy the surface. But here's what Nietzsche saw. The people living like this are actually the most envious of all, because deep down, they know they're performing a role rather than living a life. Think about the last time you truly envied someone. I mean really envied them, not just wished you had their car or their house. What were you actually envying? Chances are, it wasn't their possessions. It was something intangible. The way they carried themselves, their certainty, their aliveness, the sense that they were somehow more real than everyone else in the room, that they had figured out some secret about existence that you're still searching for. Nietzsche spent his entire philosophical career trying to articulate that secret. And what he discovered is that the people you genuinely envy are the ones who have stopped performing for an audience. They've stopped trying to live up to anyone's expectations. They've stopped chasing society's prefabricated dreams. Instead, they've done something much harder and much rarer. They've created their own values and built a life around them. This is where things get uncomfortable, because creating your own values means admitting that almost everything you were taught about what makes a good life might be completely wrong. Not wrong for everyone, but wrong for you. And this realization is terrifying because it means you can't blame anyone else if your life isn't working. You can't say your parents wanted you to be a doctor, or your culture expected you to settle down, or society pressured you to conform. At some point, you have to take responsibility for the fact that you're living someone else's dream instead of your own. Nietzsche called this moment of recognition the death of God. Now, whether you're religious or atheist, this isn't about theology. It's about that moment when you realize that there's no cosmic authority telling you how to live, no universal rulebook, no one right path. And most people experience this realization as a crisis. If nothing is objectively meaningful, then doesn't everything become meaningless? If there's no should, then how do you know what to do? But here's where Nietzsche flips the script entirely. This moment of crisis is actually the beginning of freedom, because once you realize that meaning isn't given to you, you understand that you have to create it yourself. And the people you envy, they've already figured this out. They're not following anyone's blueprint, they're writing their own. They're not trying to live correctly according to some external standard. They're trying to live magnificently according to their own internal compass. So, what does it actually mean to create your own values? This isn't some abstract philosophical exercise. It's intensely practical. It means looking at every area of your life and asking a question most people never ask. Do I actually want this, or do I just think I should want this? Do I care about this because it matters to me, or because it earns approval? Am I pursuing this dream because it's mine, or because I'll be praised for achieving it? These questions are brutal because they expose all the ways you've outsourced your own life. You've let your parents decide what success means. You've let your peers decide what's cool. You've let social media decide what happiness looks like. You've let advertising decide what you should desire. And then you wonder why achievement feels hollow. Why getting what you thought you wanted doesn't actually satisfy you. It's because you've been climbing someone else's ladder this whole time. Nietzsche introduces a concept that sounds simple, but is actually revolutionary. He calls it becoming who you are. And yes, that sounds paradoxical. How do you become what you already are? But that's exactly the point. Right now, you're not who you are. You're a composite of other people's expectations and society's programming and your own unconscious reactions to childhood wounds. The real you, the authentic you, the you that would make others envious of your existence, is buried under all of that. Think of it like this. You're a sculptor, and your life is the marble. But instead of carving away everything that isn't your true form, you've been adding layers, layer after layer of should and must and have to. You've covered yourself in so much social conditioning that you've forgotten what shape you naturally want to take. Becoming who you are means removing all those layers, chipping away everything that isn't actually you until something real emerges. This process is painful because it means letting go of identities you've invested in. Maybe you've built your entire sense of self around being the responsible one, the good child, the reliable friend, the selfless partner. And these aren't bad things, but if they're not authentically you, if you're performing them out of fear or guilt or the need for approval, then they're not serving you, they're imprisoning you. Now here's where this connects to creating an enviable life. The people you envy have already done this painful work of self-excavation. They've figured out who they actually are beneath all the conditioning. And because of that, there's a coherence to their existence that's magnetic. They're not contradicting themselves. They're not saying one thing and doing another. They're not performing virtue while feeling resentful. There's an alignment between their values, their choices, and their actions that creates a kind of power. Nietzsche calls this power the will to power, but forget everything you think that means. He's not talking about dominating others. He's talking about something internal and creative. The will to power is your life force expressing itself. It's the drive to grow, to create, to overcome obstacles, to expand your capacities, to become more than you currently are. Everything alive has this drive. A seed doesn't just want to survive. It wants to become a tree. You're the same way, except you've been taught to suppress this drive in the name of humility or contentment or realism. But suppressing your will to power doesn't make you more moral. It makes you resentful. It makes you secretly bitter about everyone who didn't suppress theirs. And this is where envy becomes toxic. When you're not expressing your own will to power, when you're not growing and creating and becoming more, you start to resent everyone who is. You start to tear down anyone who's doing what you're too afraid to do. You start to call their ambition selfishness, their confidence arrogance, their success luck, anything to avoid admitting that they're doing something you're not. Nietzsche saw this pattern everywhere. He called it ressentiment. And it's the psychology of people who have given up on their own greatness and now need everyone else to stay small too. These are the people who say they don't care about success while secretly tracking everyone else's failures, who say they're above competition while quietly keeping score, who preach humility while seething with envy. And the tragedy is that they could channel that envy into fuel for their own transformation, but instead they use it as poison. So here's a different approach. The next time you feel that twinge of envy, don't suppress it. Don't feel guilty about it. Ask yourself what it's telling you. If you envy someone's freedom, what are you allowing to cage you? If you envy their boldness, what are you too afraid to say or do? If you envy their creativity, what have you stopped creating? If you envy their joy, what have you stopped allowing yourself to enjoy? Your envy is a map to your unlived life. And here's what's beautiful about this. When you start living your unlived life, when you start expressing your will to power, when you start becoming who you actually are, something shifts. You stop being envious of others because you're too busy creating something yourself. You stop comparing yourself to other people because you're on your own path now, not competing on theirs. And this is when you become someone that others envy, not because you're performing success, but because you're radiating authenticity. Nietzsche talks about the noble type versus the slave type, and these aren't about social class, they're about psychology. The noble type creates their own values. They say, "This is good because I declare it good." They don't need external validation because they're their own authority. The slave type, on the other hand, defines themselves in opposition to others. They need someone to rebel against, someone to feel superior to, someone to blame for their limitations. Their entire identity is reactive. Most of us spend our lives in slave psychology without realizing it. We define ourselves by what we're not. We rebel against our parents' values without ever asking what we actually value. We position ourselves against mainstream culture without creating an alternative culture. We know what we're against, but we have no idea what we're for. And this is exhausting because you can never rest. You're always fighting something, always proving something, always reacting. The noble type, the person with an enviable life, has moved beyond reaction to creation. They're not trying to prove anything. They're not rebelling against anything. They're simply building something magnificent according to their own vision. And this is what makes them magnetic. People can sense when someone is living from their own center rather than in reaction to others. There's a groundedness, a certainty, a kind of sovereignty that's incredibly rare. But let's get even more specific about what this looks like in practice. Creating an enviable life means making choices that most people are too afraid to make. It means saying no to good opportunities because they're not great ones. It means disappointing people whose approval you've been chasing. It means being willing to be misunderstood. It means prioritizing what matters to you over what impresses others. And this requires tremendous strength because you're going against the current of social pressure that flows in every interaction. Nietzsche has this idea about self-overcoming. Most people think the goal is to accept yourself as you are, to love yourself unconditionally, to embrace your flaws. And while there's value in self-compassion, Nietzsche points to something more dynamic. The most alive people are constantly overcoming themselves. They're not satisfied with who they are. They're excited about who they're becoming. They set standards for themselves that no one else would impose. They push themselves harder than any external authority ever could. Think about the people whose lives you truly envy. They're probably not coasting. They're probably not resting on their achievements. They're probably pursuing something difficult, creating something ambitious, developing some skill or capacity. They're in motion, they're growing, and this growth isn't performative. They're not doing it for the gram, they're doing it because standing still feels like death to them, because they have this internal drive to see what they're capable of. This is the secret that changes everything. An enviable life isn't about reaching some destination. It's about being in perpetual motion towards something that matters to you. It's about having a project, a mission, a creative obsession, something you're building or making or becoming that gives your days purpose and direction. And the specific project doesn't matter as much as the fact that you have one, that you've chosen something worth dedicating yourself to. Nietzsche uses this beautiful phrase. He talks about giving style to your character. He says the great individuals are the ones who survey all the strengths and weaknesses of their nature and then fit them into an artistic plan. They don't try to be someone else. They take who they actually are, with all their quirks and contradictions and flaws, and they shape it into something coherent, something beautiful, something uniquely theirs. This is what people are actually envying when they envy you. Not your achievements, not your possessions, not your circumstances. They're envying the fact that your life has style, that it's a work of art, that it expresses a coherent vision, that every choice seems to be part of a larger pattern, that you're the author of your existence rather than a passive character in someone else's story. So how do you develop this style? How do you become the artist of your own life? It starts with a different relationship to difficulty. Most people avoid hardship. They optimize for comfort. They make choices that minimize pain and maximize pleasure. And there's nothing wrong with that, except it produces a very predictable, very small life. The people with truly enviable lives have a different approach. They voluntarily choose difficult things because difficulty is what creates character. Nietzsche says, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but he means something more subtle than just enduring hardship. He means that when you voluntarily take on challenges, when you push yourself beyond your current limits, when you face down fears and overcome obstacles, you're literally creating yourself. You're proving to yourself what you're capable of. You're expanding your sense of what's possible. And this builds a kind of confidence that can't be faked. The person with an enviable life has usually overcome something significant. They've faced a fear and moved through it. They've attempted something difficult and succeeded. They've failed at something important and gotten back up. And these experiences have given them a depth that people without challenges never develop. They know themselves in a way that protected people never can. And this self-knowledge is what makes them solid, unshakable, real. Here's another layer to this. Nietzsche talks about amor fati, love of fate. And this isn't some new age idea about everything happening for a reason. It's something much more powerful. It's looking at everything that's happened in your life, including the terrible things, including the failures and humiliations and losses, and saying, I wouldn't change any of it. Not because it was all good, but because all of it shaped you, and who you've become is worth everything it cost. People with enviable lives have this quality. They're not carrying resentment about their past. They're not victims of their circumstances. They've integrated everything that happened to them into their story in a way that strengthens rather than diminishes them. Every wound became wisdom. Every failure became fuel. Every loss became depth. They've alchemized their pain into power, and you can see it in how they move through the world. So let's talk about what this means for your relationships. Because one of the things that makes a life enviable is the quality of connections someone has. And Nietzsche has a counterintuitive insight here. The best relationships aren't the most comfortable ones. They're the ones that challenge you to grow. He says you should seek out friends who are like arrows, pulling you toward who you could become, rather than companions who keep you comfortable where you are. Most people surround themselves with people who validate their current identity, who don't challenge them, who don't push them to be better. And this feels safe, but it's actually stagnation. The person with an enviable life has relationships that elevate them, friends who expect more from them, partners who believe in their potential, mentors who see possibilities they can't see yet. And yes, these relationships can be uncomfortable because growth is uncomfortable, but they're also what prevent you from settling. There's this idea in Nietzsche about the eternal recurrence. He asks you to imagine living your life over and over again, exactly as it happened for eternity. Would you want that? Could you embrace it? And most people's honest answer is no, because they're living in ways they don't actually want to live. They're enduring their days rather than creating them. They're getting through life rather than savoring it. But the person with an enviable life has a different answer. They're living in such a way that yes, they would happily live it again. Every choice they make is so aligned with their values, so true to who they are, that they would choose it forever. This doesn't mean their life is easy. It means their life is theirs. And that makes all the difference. Here's where this all comes together. Creating a life worth envy isn't about achieving some external standard of success. It's about achieving internal coherence. It's about living according to values you consciously chose rather than unconsciously inherited. It's about expressing your will to power through creation and growth rather than suppressing it. It's about becoming who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. It's about loving your fate rather than resenting it. It's about making every choice so fully that you would choose it again and again. And when you live like this, something remarkable happens. You stop caring whether people envy you or not. You're too absorbed in your own becoming to worry about their perception. You're too excited about what you're creating to need their validation. You're too grounded in your own values to be shaken by their judgment. And paradoxically, this is exactly what makes you enviable. Because people can sense when someone has stopped performing and started living. The ultimate irony is this. If you try to create an enviable life so that others will envy you, you'll fail. You'll just be performing again, building another facade. But if you commit to becoming who you actually are, to expressing your unique will to power, to creating according to your own values, to loving everything that brought you here, to choosing difficulties that grow you, to making every day something you would live again, then you'll create something far better than an enviable life. You'll create a life you don't want to escape from, a life you're proud to claim, a life that feels like yours. And that's Nietzsche's hidden philosophy. It's not about being better than others. It's about being more fully yourself than most people dare to be. It's not about winning at someone else's game. It's about having the courage to play your own game entirely. It's not about creating envy. It's about creating meaning. And when you create genuine meaning, when your life becomes a work of art that expresses your deepest values and highest aspirations, When every choice flows from your authentic center rather than external pressure, people will naturally look at you and feel that twinge, that recognition that you have something they want. But here's the beautiful part. What they want isn't what you have, it's what you did. The courage to stop performing, the strength to disappoint people, the clarity to know what matters to you, the commitment to build a life around it. And they can have all of that too. They just have to be willing to do what you did, to question everything, to reject the prefabricated dreams, to excavate their authentic self, to create their own values, to express their will to power, to overcome themselves again and again. That's the gift of an enviable life. It doesn't just make people jealous. It shows them what's possible. It proves that you can live differently, that you can build something magnificent out of the raw materials of your existence, that you can transform yourself from someone who envies into someone worth envying. And the only thing standing between you and that transformation is your willingness to start, to begin the work of becoming who you are, to stop asking what others think you should do and start discovering what you actually want to create. So, here's the final question. Not what would make others envy you, but what kind of life would you be proud to live again and again forever? What would that life look like? What would you need to change? What would you need to let go of? What would you need to create? Because that's your answer. That's your path. That's the life Nietzsche is challenging you to build. Not for anyone's approval, not for social media, not to prove anything, but because you only get one existence and it would be a tragedy to waste it living someone else's version of a good life instead of creating your own masterpiece.